Hey, well, good morning from Day 2 in Connect. We're here to give you a couple of tips and tricks across the Visual Studio family. I'm Sean McBreen. I'm a product manager for Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code. Today I'm going to be talking a little bit about VS Code and some of the announcements from Connect. But before we get into that, why don't I pass on and let the others introduce themselves.
Okay. Hey everyone, I'm Jordan Mathieson. I'm a member of the Visual Studio team where I work on our Visual Studio for Mac IDE, newly released this past summer.
Cool. And my name is Deborah Chen, and I'm a program manager on the Visual Studio Diagnostics team.
Awesome. All right, well, the idea this morning is just really a set of questions and answers. Anything you guys want to submit, we'll try and get around to answering. But in the meantime, we'll give you a little bit of an overview of the products themselves and a couple of tips along the way. So as I said, I'm going to talk about Visual Studio Code. Hopefully everyone knows what that is, but it's our cross-platform, so Linux, Mac OS, and Windows editor. But it's not just a normal editor, it's an evolved editor with rich language support and debugging. So you can see on my screen right here that I've got the Visual Studio Code website. It's really easy to install it with a single click, but I've actually done that already. So getting straight into it, I'm just going to grab a terminal here, and I'm going to go into a folder that includes a project, and open up Visual Studio Code straight from the command line. And one of the big things that we released in our most recent update for Visual Studio Code is something called support for multi-folder workspaces. Multi-folder workspaces allow you to open a single folder, and it can actually have as many logical components as it wants, grouped into one operating set. So here I actually have two projects that we actually demoed in one of the keynotes. There's an Azure Java function here, so I can just expand that out and see some Java code. And that's running right within VS Code. I'll come back to that. And there's also a separate project altogether, which is a set of test harnesses written in Python for that Azure function. So let me sort of get into showing you a little bit about Visual Studio Code, and then I'll sort of back out and give some broader updates. So as I mentioned, Visual Studio Code is all about really rich language support within the editor itself. Sure, it's fantastic to have a great editing support, but straight away as I even hit this line here, you can see that I've got some git blame information. You can see 16 days ago that I edited this line of code. You can see hover information about the library that's in use here. And also I can do simple things like, control space to load up IntelliSense and rich IntelliSense documentation. And these language services are available across so many different languages inside Visual Studio Code. I'm showing our Java extension here that we partner with Red Hat, IBM, and others to build. But really we can do this across almost any language you want. Okay, so what I can see here, for instance, is I have a squiggle underneath some code. And what that means is that there's a missing import statement. So I hit that and I can get a quick fix straight away. Again, great sort of productive IDE features directly within your code base. Another one here, I've got an error here, sorted. If I look down further, you can actually see the procedure is called sort. So I can just delete that out. I could use a quick fix for that as well, but this shows you that both of those errors just disappeared. And again, I'm getting all the way through great language features like hovers and tips. So with that, one of the things I can do is quickly review those changes. And you'll see in the gutter here that there's little indicators that show that I have made changes to the source code. In this case, adding something. And straight in line within Visual Studio Code, we have a rich experience for working with source control, Git in this case. And what you can do is just simply add and subtract in messages. So that's actually a good point to sort of answer maybe a key question there is what sort of source control do we support in Visual Studio Code? We actually have a provider-based model for source control. And we support out of the box great source control for Git, things like merge conflicts, inline changes like you're seeing here. But we also have support for providers from the community in a marketplace. And there you'll find Mercurial, you'll find Team Foundation version control, you'll find Subversion, and you'll find Perforce. So really there's a pretty broad array of version control providers. So yeah, so just in this though, you can quickly page through all the changes that you've made in a file. You can see an inline diff, and you can also do things like partial scratch and commits of those changes. So really it means that you can keep focused on working on maybe a big change, but you find a little bug at the time and you just want to partially commit that. Really easy to do straight from the UI. Okay, so I've got this Java code. Actually, let's see if we can run it. So one of the things that we love in Visual Studio Code is this idea of an integrated terminal. So I just did a control backtick to open that. And one of the features that we just launched in our most recent update is the ability to have these panels organized vertically. And sometimes that's really important. I'm actually going to do a Maven clean package, which is just the build tool for Java. And you'll see it's going to give a reasonable amount of output. I opened that in the wrong folder, so let me do that in the right one, sorry. Just open it in the terminal, just got into the folder, mvn clean package. And what that's doing is it's actually building up this Java project, which as I said is an Azure serverless function. So now I can go mvn Azure functions. And I can run it. And what you're actually observing is we've made quite a few investments in the Java space, both for like the runtimes and the tooling experience. And I'm just using an extension to the Maven CLI for build that allows me to locally run this Azure function. And you can see it's running here up on a local host. Now, this function, I didn't go into the details, but what it does is it takes in a list of numbers and sorts them. You can sort of see that in the Java doc for it. But testing some of these things can be a little tricky. So one of the things I'll show you is that I'm going to actually add a new folder into this workspace. So I can just go File, Add Folder to Workspace. And I've got another little folder in here called Run Tests. I'm going to add that. And this is actually a folder that has a special file in it, the Scratchpad HTTP file, which leverages another extension from our community to make it really easy to call RESTful endpoints. So what I can do here is you see that this allows me to define some variables, and I can just with code lenses conveniently in the UI here, simply send a request. You can see that the request was sent off to the Azure function updated over here, and you can see the output over here from the Azure function. The cool thing about an extension like this is it's so much easier than working with curl on the command line. It allows you to easily prettify the output. It also has a series of really advanced features. But also sometimes if you send a malformed request, you can see this one sends a 500 back because it didn't include the parameter. It allows you to quickly test that. So another great sort of extension that makes me understand how to call these RESTful endpoints. So now that I understand how to call the RESTful endpoints, I know the data that's going to come back, why don't I actually talk about the unit tests that I've got. And so now I'm transitioning from Java code into Python code. Okay, so what I've got here is some Java code. And what I can do is you'll see straight away, again, you've got some code lenses. You're also seeing the code lens from my git blame, etc. But you can see there's a linting error here. And that linting error is saying that I'm missing a doc string. So I can just add that in, place doc string. No test, that's okay. It's just because I changed the linting. And now that I've got that, the linting error went away. And with these code lenses here, I can actually just hit a button and run the tests. And straight away again in the console you can see it hit the Azure function, and the two tests are in line indicating that they ran successfully. And what I'm really showing here is, sure, there's great language features for Python and Java, but the idea is that these same sort of experiences you can get across all the different languages, and the power of our multi-root experience really allowed us to put these both into the same instance. And then you can do some cool things. So like drop back into this Java code, and why don't I try debugging it? So let me just give me a little bit more space. I'll put the terminal down to the bottom maybe. And what I've done is I put a breakpoint. I might put it here in the Java code. And I'm going to attach my debugger to the Java. And what that does is it's basically just, again, running up the function and attaching the debugger. So now that when I call the Java code, we should be able to hit it. So let's go back. Let me run one of the tests that hit into the Java code, and I should hit the breakpoint. But I didn't. Oh, I know what's wrong. I'm going to skip this bit. Okay. All right, what should happen, and we showed in the keynote, is hit the breakpoint. I just realized I've got two different versions of my Java runtime on this machine, so the source map didn't work. So okay, so that gives you an idea though that you can work in a series of different languages right from within Visual Studio Code. Now, this part of this is about tips and tricks, so I thought I'd cover off some of the other new things that are in the product. And one of the big tips for people working with VS Code is that extensions are really core to the entire experience. And one of the things that we did recently is we have this concept of recommended extensions. And you see I'm working with Java, so we're recommending Java extensions. But if you're working with Go or any other language, we'll start recommending those things, C++ for instance. For someone who's not doing advanced Java work and everything, another great tip is to just simply look at things like the interactive playground within VS Code. If you hit the interactive playground, which is on the welcome page, it's a great place to start learning just a lot of the basic editor features. So one of the cool things you can do here is it'll give you tips about how to do multi-cursor editing, so that you can make selections of everything that you have in context and you can edit those. You can see a couple of cursors there. But also you start seeing some of the cool UI things like these color swatches, but also a color picker UI that comes up in HTML and CSS. So with these little embedded documents, you can really start using the power of VS Code. So again, this shows you IntelliSense. The important thing here is this is JavaScript IntelliSense, where the type information that's required is coming in the background with something called automatic type checking. So really easy to sort of get an overview of, say, refactoring, how you can extract methods, format code, fold code. Really just a whole host of the core feature set of VS Code is just displayed within here. Okay, so stepping back a little bit, one of the things that we talked about at Connect, and I'm just looking, I'm just reading the question. So one of the questions is, well, I'm going to answer it, what sort of things did we talk about for VS Code at Connect? Well, an easy way to deal with that is just to sort of go to our website and the blog post here. So first thing we talked about is it's really been a big 12 months for VS Code in terms of the number of features that we've released and the updates that we've done. And at Connect, that sort of accumulated in a number of things. We announced something called Visual Studio Live Share. Visual Studio Live Share allows you to have collaborative sort of sessions between yourselves and a peer. You can ask for help, you can get support, and it spans Visual Studio and Visual Studio the IDE, Visual Studio Code rather, and Visual Studio the IDE. So you can have a tough problem you're working on, you can invite someone who's an expert in your team to come and help you. And the thing that's amazing about Live Share is it's not about just simply co-editing, so you can both edit a document if you like. It's the full, rich semantic understanding of the document is exchanged between both participants. What that means is IntelliSense works, peak definition, hovers, debugging, the ability to actually independently step through your code. All of those things are working in this sort of shared session. And it's so much more than just having the code shared itself. You could do that in a Word document almost, but being able to share all this context around the actual development experience is the key thing. We also announced that we are getting more serious about supporting Java and Python. And I just gave you a quick demo of some Java and Python support, really to drum in the fact that VS Code isn't just about Node or JavaScript development. In fact, that accounts for about 1/3 of our users. We have all these other rich languages, and one of the things we did in the space of Java and Python is we've also created a set of tutorials on our website so you can get going with Java and Python and VS Code. So if you're a Java or Python user, I'd really encourage you to have a look at these things so you can quickly get up and running. We also showed a set of sort of demos for doing things like debugging inside containers and with our Docker extension. So that's something that you can just drill into, but the idea is that containerized development really streamlines setting up environments and obviously deploying some of those environments to things like the cloud. And we have some great tooling for that available for Visual Studio Code, and Chris Diaz in the keynote demoed some of that. And of course, then we released one of our monthly updates, and it was a big monthly update for us. I actually showed you a couple of the things very briefly. Vertical panels, for example, for the terminal, the inline source control changes. But of course, this feature that I mentioned, multi-root workspace, is actually the largest feature that we've been working for a long time. And it was the #1 requested feature for VS Code. So a lot of things happened there, but the real thing we wanted to highlight was that we are so lucky to have a great community and set of users for VS Code. And one of the things in this blog is we talk about over the last 12 months, just some of the amazing things that we've been able to add into the project. And we have many, many more plans as well. So if you haven't checked in with VS Code for a little while, I'd encourage you to go here, and what we'll talk about is all the key things that we added in a given release, both foundational, things like performance improvements, but also feature-wise, things like a minimap, for instance, turning that on by default. And if you haven't caught up with us for a while, you can always click into the detailed release notes, which have things like animated GIFs and show you how the product is sort of shaping up. So with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass to Jordan to quickly go on to VS for Mac, and we'll come back around with some other questions.
Sounds good.
Cool.
Thanks, Sean. And before we move on real quick, I saw we had the question come on. I want to hit on it before we forget about it in case more questions come in and it scrolls past. So there's a question about, specifically for the VS IDE, around any timeline for getting CodeMap working for Xamarin projects in VS. I work closely with the Xamarin team. I don't have an answer for that right now. I don't know if you know anything, Deborah.
No, I don't.
Okay, so I want to at least make sure to hit on that before we move too far forward. And as a reminder to everybody, too, if you want to send us some more questions, we're watching live in the room here and happy to answer those as they come in. So with that, we've seen some VS Code editing stuff. That was awesome, Sean. Now I'm going to go and show you a bit of Visual Studio for Mac. So if you aren't familiar with it, this is our new native IDE for Mac developers, or developers working on a Mac. We released it this past summer, and we've put out about 3 different versions so far. We're in a preview now for our version 7.3, which you can get today. And I'm going to give you just general tips and tricks on how to set up the IDE to work best for you, set it up to suit your style, give you some keyboarding shortcuts and a few tips and tricks here. If you aren't familiar with it, you can go on out to the website aka.ms/vsmac and download the product. And if you are interested in trying our preview releases, I just want to point out real quick how you get those is you come on into our check for updates option under the Visual Studio menu and grab this beta channel. And if you subscribe to that, you'll get on the latest preview that we have out. So a real quick overview of our IDE environment. Like I said, it's designed to feel like a Mac application. It's a native experience for developers, so you've got familiar toolbar with like play buttons you may be familiar with in iTunes and Xcode. We've got our notification bar up here in the top, which is where you see status messages come across. And then we've got our search box up here for doing some not just plain text searching, but some more smart searching. So this is sort of a first tip and trick for you right away. If I come in here and say I search for visitor, I can actually get a match on files in my solution, types in my C# classes, for example, and commands in the IDE, such as opening up an application output window here. So a few things you can do if you want to explore the IDE a bit is if I use the search box and hit C:, I can search for commands in the IDE and say I want to try and find certain options. I can go through here and figure out stuff like source analysis. It's a good reminder too, if you don't remember that keyboard shortcut or that setting that you know the IDE had in there, if you come on up and just do a search for this command you know you want, you'll get a reminder of the keyboard shortcut on the screen. Now like I said, the IDE, actually I didn't touch on this yet, I should have hit this. The project support we've got in the IDE, we support developers building out mobile, web, and cloud solutions using .NET Core, working with C#. We have mobile development with the Xamarin scenario. We have web development using .NET Core, and then if you're a Unity game developer, we've also got support for that for you. So let me go on into our preferences here and touch on some of the options we've got for you as a few more quick tips and tricks. First one that's usually pretty popular is around the look and feel of your IDE. So if you're a fan of a dark theme, you could come in and we have an option here to change the IDE around to be a dark look and feel. If you just like your text editor to be a little bit different, come on into these color themes down here under this text editor section, and you can see some options for just changing your editor color schemes. Now a fun trick is if you have styles you like over, say on Visual Studio on Windows, or you've seen settings files shared before for VS, you can come over and use those in VS for Mac as well. Here I'm using a very classic Son of Obsidian theme from VS. And I also have support for TextMate themes, so if you've got some you like there, you can bring them into the IDE and get to mix and match the look of your editor. Since a lot of us spend a lot of time in editing, let me really be sure to hit on those for the tips and trick kind of stuff here and point out a few more helpful things. If I bounce back up here to key bindings, this is a good place to go to first get an idea of some of the functionality the IDE provides you, and also to just start really tailoring it to your style, how you like to work with the tooling. We have bindings in here set up so you could get some defaults to match up with, say, Visual Studio on Windows or Visual Studio Code. I can come in and if you just look through here, like I said, gives you a good idea of some of the capabilities of the IDE. And there are even a few experimental features in here we'll see from time to time. For example, we have our mini map that is in the IDE in a few places, and you could set it up to, say, bind to Command Control M on the Mac and have this available over in the editor. So now I hit Command Control M, and there's our friend the mini map on the side. So key bindings, that's another good tip and trick to play around, look at those, explore the IDE, set it up how you like to use it. Finally, a few more quick preference settings to look at here. If you go on in and you explore some options in here, such as behaviors for the editing experience, you can tweak it for number of editors, not just our C# editor, but also HTML, CSS, and JSON. And it's fun to point out those 3 editors actually are built on the same editor code base as Visual Studio on Windows, kind of giving a fun example of where we are leveraging our code across platforms and kind of looking to reuse what we can there. A few other options, IntelliSense, and the last one to hit here would be, say, source analysis. And this shows you a way to configure the hundreds of rules we have that are powered by Rosin for our editing experience. So I have a whole bunch of source analysis rules showing in here. I can set up to either warn me, don't ever show them as informational tooltips. And if you look, you can see along the side of the IDE here, for example, we've got this bar that's got some different highlights on it. And these are showing source code analysis rules. So it would tell me, for example, that there's a place where a null check could be simplified. And I could scroll in here, and it took me to this line of code, and I can get a preview of the change that's being suggested. So down below, you'll see the before and the after. And another tip here is the keyboard sequence option return or alt return brings up our quick fix menu. So that's a very useful one to use to help you kind of refine your code and refactor it a bit here and there. Before I continue on with some text editing things, let me see real quick. I see a question came up here. The question was asking about the NuGet package manager experience in VS Mac and getting it on par with VS Windows. I wonder if there are any hints. It's a little bit tedious now, someone's saying. We do know of some things specifically like solution level package management that can be a pain. I can't give you a specific timeline right now, but it's on the list. We are looking at it. It's not in this 7.3 preview you'll see, but definitely we're aware of some things there. We work closely with the NuGet team, and we'll keep looking at it. This is a good time to say if anybody has some suggestions you want to provide too. Take a look over in the IDE under our Help menu, and under Report a Problem and Provide a Suggestion, there's a couple places there that you can also submit some feedback. This is one of those, for example, with NuGet that we have heard before, and so we are on it. Okay, so let's touch on some code editing items here. We've talked on color schemes, key binding, setting up some of your source editor options. I'm going to show you a little bit more back around window management and then the text editor settings. So one thing unique in VS for Mac is our layout option, which you have a set of layouts here, pre-configured layouts of windows, such as bringing up the test layout here. So I've got my test results come up below, my tests to run on the side. And if I run these, I've got a nice experience in there to be able to rapidly work through my tests. So red, green, refactor, that sort of a loop if you're familiar with it. Unit tests in VS for Mac with our 7.3 preview release, we have support now for MS test as well as XUnit. And we've had NUnit for a while as well. So if you're a fan of those frameworks, definitely check out the preview release. Back in layouts here, I can go back to code mode. It's worth pointing out there are a few others like design that brings up a UI that's more useful when you're doing some visual design work. And debug as well brings up the debug settings, the layout of windows you see when you're debugging an app. Those are a couple that are automatically switched to by the IDE based upon what you're doing. But in this case, I'm going to go back to code. And you can also create your own layouts. Like I have a code-focused layout I've set up for myself here that removes a little bit more. And I could then go in and do enter full screen and have a straight, immersed in my code sort of experience. Or exit full screen and come back to my standard code layout here. All right, let's see real quick. I think I see a couple other questions came in. Some questions around CSS syntax verification and linting. We do have some, on the VS for Mac side of things, the CSS editor that's built in has support for some of the latest standards and gives you some simple level linting and validation support. On the VS Code side, anything you'd add there?
Yeah, on the VS Code side, we have a lot of sort of linting support and CSS support directly in the product. I showed, for instance, the color swatch. We also have previews of how things will show up in HTML. But there are a number of extensions in the marketplace that basically show the compatibility of all the CSS variables and different HTML standards, and that's the place I'd start for some of the richer linting. Is just a quick search in the marketplace for CSS extensions. And there's a good chunk of them for linting, for formatting, the things that aren't directly incorporated in the box. Yeah, there's another quick question here as well we can take now. From Richard, he sort of says, is VS Code a separate product from VS the IDE? Yeah, it's absolutely a separate product, a separate website for it, code.visualstudio.com, a separate download and a separate install. The key difference is VS Code is this lightweight cross-platform editor. So there's a lot of things that you find in the richness of the full Visual Studio IDE that aren't included in VS Code, like all the runtimes, for instance, that you need, or emulators or design surfaces. But you can get a very small download, say so it's about 36 megs on Windows, and you can get up and running and really have a very rich editing experience. And in the box, we really ship first-class support for Node and the sort of JavaScript and web stacks that are out there. But through our extension gallery and marketplace, there really is pretty much any level of extension that you need, or other language. You probably saw C++ and Go in my extension well. But pretty much any language that's out there, there's an extension for VS Code for it that offers rich language semantics, IntelliSense debugging, F#, Rust. I could really just keep on going. There's a huge list of them there. So separate product from Visual Studio, but they work side by side, and lots of people use them together as well. But the key difference is cross-platform and editor-centric rather than this tightly integrated experience that you see with Visual Studio, the IDE. Sir, yeah.
Another question come up that I definitely want to hit on because we get asked this a bit. So on TFS support in Visual Studio for Mac, we don't have anything yet. We are definitely working on that even as soon as this week, doing some of our own internal prototyping and experimenting around it. So we hear the feedback very loudly and clearly on that one, and we are on it. But nothing at this point that I can share, definitely not for the 7.3 preview that's out now. Okay, so now let's go back to our editor here while we wait for some more questions to come in. And I know a lot of us like keyboard shortcuts and text editing tips and tricks. So I want to round out my time with you here to do that. I'm going to switch over to one of my classes using my search box here and go over to the visitors controller where I've got a few things. Actually, visitor repository is what I want. I just need to scroll my screen up. Okay. So one thing similar to what Sean was showing with VS Code is block selection in the IDE. So let's say I came in and I wanted to actually change all of my visitor ID properties in this data to just be an ID field. I can hold down my Option key on the Mac and select that range, and I have multi-cursor editing as I type over, change that name around. Let's say you want to move around some lines quickly in the IDE. If you hold down the Option key, you can move lines up and down. So reorder items here nice and easily. We also have a handy selection tool. So you can, using the Alt-Shift and like down or up arrows, you can actually change your selection up through scopes and back down. So you can see here, if I walk it back, I can start down with this selection of the visitor ID member, and I can move it up a level through the statements. Select a whole line, I can now move up to a full block, go on up to my method, and kind of quickly move around my selection a little bit. That can come in handy, especially when working with deeply nested code. And again, on our quick fixes menu that I mentioned, this is a good keyboard shortcut if there's one you come away with, which is that Alt-Enter that brings up those quick fixes, the refactorings you can make to your code. So for example, this is where you could come in and use, say, an extract method call and pull that out to a new method. Along with that test tooling I showed earlier, you're backed up with your tests, hopefully, to help watch you, keep you safe as you're refactoring and moving through your code. And the IDE has you is supporting you with refactoring capabilities and like. Let's see if I have any last quick thing to show here. Yeah, so really those are the main text editor things I wanted to show real quick. Finally on the window management also. If you're one like me that likes to work with multiple monitors, then say you could take a window and move it outside, pop it into a separate window that you can move over to an external monitor. I can do a few other final things here, such as switch my columns to a couple of columns and be able to do some side-by-side text editing. And that is another keyboard shortcut command option. 1 would switch you between 1 column, and then 2 to go to 2 columns. Great. So there was a whirlwind tour of a number of things in Visual Studio for Mac. Hopefully you got a bit of a sense of the IDE if it's the first time you've worked with it. Gave you some tips and tricks to help kind of customize it and tailor it to suit your needs, and some text editor tricks to help you move around real fast with the IDE and code, build, test, refactor your code. With that, yeah, if you want, check out our latest Visual Studio for Mac version 7.3 preview. You can download the IDE from aka.ms/vsmac will take you to the homepage on visualstudio.com. And again, if you go into our Check for Updates menu, you can switch on over to our beta channel to get this preview release. And we'd love any feedback you have. We watch it very closely. And so go on up the help menu in the IDE, report a problem, or provide a suggestion is a great way to get stuff to us really quickly. So with that, Deborah, if you want to kind of round out the set of demos here, everybody keep your questions coming.
Yep,
I'll hand it on over to you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jordan. So I'm Deborah. I am a program manager on the Visual Studio Diagnostics team. And today I am also going to give you a whirlwind tour of some of the great productivity features in the Visual Studio IDE. That's the one for Windows. There's going to be some features around editing, navigation, debugging to really help you be the most productive you can in your day-to-day development. Some of these features are new in Visual Studio 2017, so I'll point those out. And some of them have actually been around for quite a while, but in any case, I hope you're able to take something away and learn something new. So let's get started. Here on my screen, I have an app called Visual Studio Rideshare. And this is a ride-sharing service staffed by members of the Visual Studio team. And in today's demo, I want to add a new feature called Get Best Drivers, which lists out the members of the team with the highest rating in the service. So if I click on the button, I'm taken to this empty placeholder page because I haven't actually written the code yet. So let's switch over to Visual Studio and write some code. The first thing I want to do is go to my Get Best Drivers method. Using the new Go to All navigation feature in Visual Studio 2017, I can invoke Control-T and quickly go to any line, file, member, or type. So I can use this to go to Get Best Drivers. And here I am, and it's a really quick way just to go to anything you want to look for in your project or solution. Another cool way to navigate that we find a lot of people don't know about is you can actually change your scroll bar setting to have this map view option, which you can do in right-click scroll bar options. And it'll give you a map view of your entire file with a preview hover tip. So you can actually get a bird's eye view of your entire file without actually having to scroll up and down. So that's a cool tip I like. All right, so now that I'm in Get Best Drivers, I see someone has left me a to-do to actually implement this feature. So it's telling me I should use this driver manager object, or this class, to write my code. So I can do that, but I actually really want to understand what's happening inside driver manager first. So using the new in Visual Studio 2017 Control-Click feature, I can do Control-Click to quickly go to the definition of that class, and that works for things like methods as well. So now that I'm in driver manager class, I see that this type is actually in the same file as homecontroller.cs. I know a lot of us, when we like to write code, we put all the types in the same file, and then we do a big cleanup step at the end where you copy and paste the code into a different file, save it, move things around, and it can be pretty tedious. So one thing we've done in VS 2017 is we've added a brand new refactoring to help with this cleanup step. Now when I click on Driver Manager, I get a light bulb suggestion that gives me the option to just automatically move this type to another file. So with one click, it's gone. And now I can go ahead, use Control-T again, and go work in the other file, Driver Manager. All right, here I am. So now that I'm in this file, I want to show you some of the other awesome refactorings we've added that are also new in VS 2017. The great thing about these refactorings is that we're always adding more and more new ones. So today I'm just going to give you 2 or 3 that I really like. And if you want to check out the full list, check out our release notes and our blog posts and things like that. So one refactoring I really like helps me when writing constructors for a class. So here I have a constructor that takes in drivers and vehicles. And right now, only drivers is really a property of this class. One thing I can do is I can use a refactoring to automatically extract out the vehicles property. So it'll create and initialize the property for me. And with one click, VS has written the code that I might have had to copy and paste and spend extra time working on. So that saved me quite a bit of time. Another refactoring I like is around code consistency. So I know for if statements, at least I like to have braces for all my if statements. And sometimes I just forget to add them. So instead of having to add the braces myself and mess around with the formatting after the fact, I can use a new refactoring that will automatically add the braces for me. And in addition to doing it for this particular case, I can even use it to add the braces for all if statements across my entire file, project, or even solution. So it's a really quick way to mass make any changes that you might want to do like this. All right, so now looks like the if statements are added inside my trim drivers with low ratings method. And now that I'm happy with this file, I'm going to go back to home controller and actually write the code for the feature. Another cool way to navigate inside Visual Studio is I can use this navigate backward button here, which keeps track of all the places that my cursor was at, so I can quickly go back to any location really quickly. So I'll use it to just go back to my get best drivers method, and here I am. So now that I'm here, I can actually start writing some code. Notice when I start typing, IntelliSense that we all know and love is popping up. And new in VS 2017, you'll see these new icons at the bottom. These allow you to filter out or filter down your IntelliSense results. So you can filter by property, you can filter by methods, by fields. So this is really great for those times where you have a ton of IntelliSense results being returned, and you just want to return, get a filtered list because you pretty much know what you're looking for, but you just need a little help from IntelliSense to find it. So I'm going to use my new trim drivers with low ratings method. And another cool thing about IntelliSense is that it actually searches by camel casing too. So you notice I typed TDW and it actually matched trim drivers with low ratings. So I'll give it the rating threshold that we're going to set. I saw there was a sort method too, so why not? I'll sort the drivers by the rating. And of course, I should return the actual best drivers instead of this placeholder empty list I had before. One last trick I really like in Visual Studio, similar to what Jordan showed, is there's a peak definition that I can use. So here I'm using the sort drivers by rating method, and if I just want to quickly get a reminder of what that code is actually doing, instead of navigating to that other file and then having to navigate back here, I can actually invoke Alt F12 and get a peek or preview of the definition inside my current context. So this is really great because I don't have to move to a different file. I can just stay in the zone and stay where I am. All right, so I'm happy with this code now, so I'll start and debug it. And in the meantime, I'll just show you a quick recap of some of the things we've seen. So I showed you a bunch of things around navigation and also around editing and IntelliSense, things that are new. This is just tip of the iceberg for some of the awesome editing navigation features in VS 2017 and just all in the VS IDE. So if you want to get more in depth, feel free to check out the release notes or blog posts or other videos. All right, let's see how our app is doing. All right, so my app is started up, and let's see how the get best drivers method is working. And unfortunately, none of the drivers showed up. But this is actually okay because now I'm going to be able to show you a bunch of the awesome debugging features inside the IDE. So the first thing I'm going to do is set a breakpoint at my line of code that I want to debug. So I set a breakpoint at line 41, hit my breakpoint, and now it looks like all my actions happening inside my driver manager object. So I'll just right click to add a watch, and now I can look at it in my watch window. I'll take one step over, so F10. Looks like the driver manager object has the best drivers object with 19 drivers in it. That's what I expected, that's great. And when I take another step, suddenly all my drivers have disappeared. So this is a really common scenario where you're stepping, you see a variable change in an unexpected way, and then all you want to do in that moment is just go back one step and see what the data was before. So normally you might restart your application or hit your breakpoint again and step more carefully. But what's a great feature that's new in Visual Studio 2017 is for IntelliTrace, which is a VS Enterprise feature. I'm able to use the new step backward button to quickly step back to the previous step and see the full state of my application at this point in time. So now that I'm at line 43, I can see what my call stack was then. I can look at my locals, expand out this, and see all the data, like a full snapshot of my application at that point in time. Of course, data tips also work, and watch window works. And now that I have my best drivers back, I just see that I'm filtering by a rating threshold of 10. So I really want to know what ratings the drivers actually have. Did any driver even have a rating of 10? Maybe that's why they're getting filtered out. So I can expand out best drivers and actually look at them one by one, but that's pretty tedious. So instead, I'm going to go over to the immediate window, which you can think of as a playground window for your code. So in this window, you can write and evaluate expressions and test out hypotheses about your code and data. So I'll write an expression here that answers the question, what is the highest rating any individual driver had? And the answer to that is 5. So it looks like that's a cause of my bug, which is my rating threshold is set to 10, but the highest rating any driver actually had was 5. So let's go ahead and make that change. If I go up to my rating threshold, I can quickly change this to 5 and hit save. And notice I didn't actually have to stop the app, make the change, and restart. With a feature called Edit and Continue, which we've had for quite a while, you're able to make small changes inside your code, and then Visual Studio will automatically rebuild and recompile it on the fly. So I'll hit Continue. All right, I'll hit my breakpoint again. And now you see that my M rating threshold is now set to 5. So let me hit Continue one more time and see if that small change fixed my issue. And unfortunately, the drivers still aren't disappearing. So that's all right. We'll take this time to show you even more debugging features inside VS. I'll hit my breakpoint, and this time I'm going to step more carefully into trim drivers with low ratings. So I'll step into that with F11. And oops. The first thing I see here is there's a for loop that's iterating backwards through a collection. And my first instinct with a for loop is always just to hit F10, F10, F10. And that can get pretty tedious sometimes doing that over and over again. So I can actually use a new feature in Visual Studio 2017 called Run to Click, which will save me a lot of time. With Run to Click, I can hover over any line of code, click on this green icon, and Visual Studio will automatically run execution to that line. So if I go to my locals window, I see right now I is 18, hit Run to Click again. Now I is 17, run to click again, I is 16. So it's a really great way to navigate through for loop, and you don't have to press F10 over and over again. Now, I have my data in my locals window, but I know a lot of us like to use the data tips as well. You like to hover over your variables and see them in the context of your code. One thing that's really great about data tips that we find a lot of folks might not know is that you can actually pin the data tip. So if you're getting tired of moving your mouse and hovering over and over again, you can hit this pin icon, and now this data tip will actually stay in the editor. So in addition to pinning the top level object, you can actually pin individual fields too. So I will pin this rating average field since that's what we're interested in. And now if I run to click again, you'll see that the data is actually changing and the data tip is right there for me. So shows you pin data tips, run to click. Now let's go back and actually try to fix the problem. So we already know that there's at least one driver out there who has a rating of 5, but somehow when I go to that page, none of them are showing up. So let's try to get one driver with a rating of 5 to show up, because I know they exist. I could continue to hit F10 or even run to click over and over until I encounter a driver. I'm sure many of us have done that in our debugging. But I can actually do this even more quickly by using a feature called conditional breakpoints. So a conditional breakpoint is like a regular breakpoint, except it only hits when a certain condition is evaluated to true. So I can go to my breakpoint settings window, hit conditions, and set a condition that's driver.rating_average equals 5. So next time I hit continue, my breakpoint will only hit when the driver has a rating of 5. All right, and indeed, you saw before, I forgot what I was, but it was some number that wasn't 4, and we skipped a bunch of drivers to get to I equals 4. And now we have a driver with rating 5. So now that I'm here, if I take a step, F10, I see here I have this less than or equal to comparison, but it should be less than, because when I do less than equal to, the equals part is actually filtering out and removing the drivers with the rating of 5. So using edit and continue again, I'll make a small change to make this less than. And when I hit continue, I should expect my page to now show up with all my drivers. So let's see. Let me remove this breakpoint. Continue. And now my page is being populated by all the drivers with the rating of 5.
Great.
All right, great.
Yeah.
So the demo worked.
Fantastic. Well,
Okay.
I might I'll pick it up back up
Yeah.
over here, and I managed to patch up my little demo that failed, and we can quickly finish with the VS Code side of things. So I wanted to show you just one of the things that VS Code obviously includes, as well as being an editor. Before I go back to standard tips and trips, is a great debugging experience. And so I set a breakpoint in my Java code here. I just set it at the wrong point. And I've attached the debugger. You can see the debug toolbar here. And what I'm going to do is just run one of these tests, and that will hit the debugger straight away. And what you can see is many of the exact same things that we just saw on the Visual Studio side are also present in Visual Studio Code and VS for Mac. For instance, one thing that's unique here is we have this concept of inline debug values. This allows you to really see the state of all of the objects, but you can obviously use watches and locals, and we have a debug REPL to let you inspect variables. But there's a really rich debugging experience right within the product here as well. And if you're used to debugging, you'll feel right at home. Even things like being able to set different types of breakpoints. For instance, I can set a conditional breakpoint or a hit count breakpoint, and also the sort of run to next position. So debugging, the thing I wanted to really highlight with the Python and Java examples is sure, VS Code's a great editor, which I'm going to talk about in a few seconds, but we really have this rich language support for a huge array of different languages within VS Code. So, you know, if you're a Go developer, you're a Python developer, a Java developer, a C++ developer, a C# developer, there's great support in VS Code for all of those things. Just attach the debugger. Back to general tips and tricks, one of the things I want to say is right on our website itself, you'll see under the documentation and get started, there's a whole section called tips and tricks. And from this, it really walks through all the things that you do to change themes, customize keyboard shortcuts, etc. But I want to show you maybe just 2 things that I think will really improve your productivity in VS Code. The one thing that you really have to understand is there in VS Code is Command P, which is quick open, or the prefix there is something we call the command palette. And from here you can access any command in VS Code. So for instance, we saw expanding selection before. You can just type in and you've got expand select. And the thing that you can do is you can activate it directly here from the command palette, but you can also learn the key binding. So it helps you to both learn the key bindings for these things, very keyboard-centric product VS Code, but also see all the commands that are available to you. And something a lot of people don't fully understand is if you just delete that all and type question mark like it's in there, there's actually a huge number of things you can do from the command palette. So for instance, people ask, do you have like a symbols view within a file? And yeah, you can just go search across symbols inside a workspace, inside a certain file, and this allows you to quickly navigate through. Just some of the cool features that are in there hidden away in some degree in the command palette, but there's a lot of power that you can do there. Splitting editors, running tasks, installing extensions, etc., etc. So that's probably the biggest tip I give you is make sure you know about the command palette. It'll show you all the hidden features in the product. So with that, there's a couple of other questions. One of them is, are there any plans to port V6 extensions to VS for Mac?
Okay. Question. Right now we are still working on our extensibility story. We have our own add-in model. Some of you may or may not know. We are looking at ways to leverage V6. It's fair to say that you would not be able to run the same executables and extensions you have in VS on Windows over on the Mac. They're a bit different from the extensibility model and the like. So our plans are to look at what makes sense for reuse across editors, explore that space, what can we do. There are things like the HTML, CSS, JavaScript, C# editors all share some elements of source between the Visual Studio on Windows and VS on the Mac, and so there may be something there we can work with.
Yeah, one of the things I know that we've worked hard is some of the hardest parts of back-end extensions, things like the language servers themselves, are in fact shared across the whole family of products, like the TypeScript compiler or Roslyn for managed code. And a lot of the demos I gave for both Java and Python, those back-end services are able to be integrated through something called the language server protocol on both products. So we do have, while we don't have the binary compatibility of the v6 itself, we definitely have the ability to share a lot of the hard work that developers build for debuggers and language services across the breadth of the family. And we're seeing more and more of that happening. Another question. When a project's initially added to TFS, it includes a set of files sometimes. Is there clear guidance about what files should be included or not included inside a version control commit? It's really, I don't know the perfect answer. That's probably a question for the TFS team, but what I can tell you is all of our products support things like in the case of Git, for instance, a .gitignore file. In the node space, for instance, you don't want to include your node modules directory. And that's the way that the version control providers understand what should and should not be committed into source control. I don't know the specific answer, unfortunately, for .lock and .dg files. I don't know if either of you guys do. Okay. All right, there's a question here from Richard. Can you show demo the key integration features between VS Code and the VS IDE? Well, I don't have VS on my machine here, but I can iterate through a number of the scenarios that are shared between the two products. I mentioned some of the back-end extensions a few minutes ago, but probably one of the coolest things we showed at Connect was this concept of Visual Studio Live Share. And that's a great integration between Visual Studio, the IDE, and VS Code, enabling you to sort of do collaborative development and editing. And I mentioned this at the beginning. The thing that's really amazing about it is it's not just about raw editing of the buffers inside the workspaces across a number of people. It's really about sharing full context. So what I mean by that is you can debug and one person can step through, you can see your other person's selection, and you can independently hover and get rich language support, all without needing to install the framework and even the source code that you're pairing with someone on. So that's a really great example of some integrations between the family. Other things that are shared, and we saw even TextMate bundles for theming in VS for Mac, that's also supported in Visual Studio. And one of the other things that was covered off is sort of key bindings and key maps. We have the ability to, say, in VS Code, adopt the Visual Studio key map as well, so you can sort of get a lot of common things. So lots of touch points, even the ability to open up the same lightweight solutions across both products. Yeah. Is there any other questions there that we should try and knock off? Where can we find, where can we find the list of supported languages by the language understanding service? I'm not sure I fully understand that question, but one of the things for VS Code you can certainly do is head over to the gallery. And in here you can really see there's categories at the bottom. You can see languages that are supported. We have over 1,000 language extensions. This is sort of sorted by the most popular ones. So again, you can see Java, you can see PowerShell, you can see Java support, and you can really search for almost any language that you want in here, and you can see, for instance, the Rust extension mentioned. So that's one way that you can find the languages that are supported. Okay, I think we're almost at time. Just see if there's any other questions on there. How could one create and debug an extension? Scott W. asks for VS Code. It's actually incredibly easy to create and debug an extension, and there's several videos of me doing it on Channel 9, but the easiest thing to do is just jump into our documentation. There's a section called Extension Authoring, and just go straight to this example, Hello World, and literally it takes about 10 minutes. You'll get all the tool chain, and you'll be debugging and running your first extension. There's also a second example of a word count, and then most of our extensions are open source, so you can really see how they work well. Right. So take one last question that's up on the monitor. is there any way to port VS Code editor key bindings to Visual Studio 2017? Actually, there's not a way to export our key bindings that we have today. There's something we should look at so that's easy to import the key bindings. I didn't really cover it off too much, but in VS Code, one of the things that we do have the concept of is you can basically go into preferences here and see something called key map extensions, because people have a lot of muscle memory. And I mentioned that you can use the Visual Studio key binding, so that's the opposite direction from the question. But you can use Vim and all these other things, and the idea is just with a simple key press, we bind to all the common sort of key bindings that you're already used to, so you don't have to relearn everything. And we don't have that today in the same way for Visual Studio, but we should look at it. We should look at it. All right, well, I think we're pretty much at time. I don't know if you guys have any last thoughts you want to add in?
No, nothing further here. That was great.
Yeah.
Thanks everybody for joining us.
Yeah,
Hope
thank
you
you.
learned
Thanks
a
so
few
much.
things.
Enjoy, and make sure you go and check out all the great videos for the rest of the Connect content. Things like Visual Studio Live Share, there's great videos about that in the keynote and up on our websites, and you can really track along with all the great announcements that were made at Connect. Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care.